Welcome to MathLink Academy. I am Mr. C, and I will be covering this unit about fractions. We're going to talk about adding and subtracting fractions. I really enjoy this unit as I enjoy all the other ones, but this one is really special to me. And so let's look at how we're going to add and subtract fractions, and let's get started. Now, with the concept of adding and subtracting fractions, they're basically the same as far as the concept. But let's start with adding fractions. The main thing we want to do is find the lowest common denominator for our fraction, and then we keep the denominator being the same. We don't add the denominator. We only add the numerator once we find the lowest common denominator. Now, I'll just put a side note. If you're not able to find the lowest common denominator, or if you find a common denominator, once you get your final answer, you will have to simplify it to the lowest term that we talked about in our previous unit. So let's look at this particular example far as finding the lowest common denominator. In this example, we look here, we see that we have the value of 1/2, if you look on the third part, and also 3/4. Those are our fractions here. And we want to find the lowest common denominator. And if we, again, it's good to find the lowest, but if you're not able to find it, I could show you that. You just have to make sure you reduce your answer or give it in the simplest terms. So what we look at is the 2 and the 4. Now, for looking at the 2 and the 4, notice that the 2 and 4, what is common? What's the multiples? We're looking at multiple, what's common in both of them? Now, 2 is the smallest number, so, and 4 is the greater number. And notice this, in this case, it says, for example, the lowest common denominator of this fraction, just looking at the denominator, is 4. Since 4 is the smallest number, evenly divided by both 2 and 4. So 2 goes into 4 evenly, and a 2 goes into itself evenly. Now, some people may say, well, I would have used 8 as a number. I'm going to write that number down, 8, as a common denominator. 2 can go into 8, and also 4 can go into 8. So 2 can go into 8, 4 can go into 8, and that's a common denominator for these fractions, but it's not the lowest common denominator. Again, you could use 8, but again, when you get your final answer, make sure you reduce it to the lowest terms or simplify it. So in this case, our answer would be 4. So let me just actually do this particular problem for you to show you what we can do as far as adding and subtracting. And then we'll do some exercises with finding the common denominator or the lowest common denominator. Now, on our whiteboard, we see the numbers 1/2 and 3/4, and we're adding. I like to do it vertically, so it's a lot easier for me to see how to add going up and down. In this case, we said our common denominator will be 4. So since that's our common denominator, I'm going to put that down, 4, and nothing changes with the bottom fraction because it's 3/4. It has the denominator as 4. But the upper fraction, we have to change that numerator. So basically, this is what I want to say. What you do on the bottom, you do on the top. What you do on the top, you do on the bottom. So how do I make that 2 a 4? I multiply by 4. I multiply by 2, and you're going to do the same thing up here. We're going to multiply by 2 to the numerator. What you do on the bottom, you do on the top, or what you do on the top, you do on the bottom. You want to keep the fractions equal and not, even though they look different, they have the same value. So 2 times 2 is 4. 1 times 2 is 2. So 1/2 is equal to 2/4. Now, since we have the same denominators, all you do here is you write down 4 as your denominator, and you just add the numerators. And our answer here will be 5/4. And that's our improper fraction, our number here. Now, we can circle that if you would like to give that as your answer, or you can convert this to a mixed number. And so your answer 5/4 can be changed by using long division. Remember, we did this before in our past units. We want to see how many times 4 goes into 5 without going over and multiply. It'd be 1. 1 times 4 is 4. Subtract, again, we do our subtraction, and we have a 1 down here. So that's my remainder. How do we write this as a mixed number? We use this 1 in the numerator. It'd be 1, and then our remainder will become a numerator 1 over our divisor, which is 4. And so what I circle in red is a improper fraction, and then what I circle in orange is a mixed number, but they have the same value. So it depends how you want to write your answer or how your instructor would like for you to write their answer or write your answer for the problem. Now I'm going to do the same problem again. This time, I'm not going to find the lowest common denominator. I'm going to find a common denominator. So sometimes you may not know how to find the lowest common denominator. Again, you could do this with 2 fractions, 3 fractions, 4 fractions. What I'm going to show you, in this case, we'll just do it 2 fractions. Let's say you didn't know or couldn't figure out the lowest common denominator. And so one way you can do it is you can look at the denominator here, which is 2, and the denominator here, which is 4. What you can do is multiply this denominator by 4 and this denominator by 2. So all I did was I multiplied the top fraction by the denominator of the second one, and the second fraction by the denominator of the first fraction, the one that's on top. So and in this case, look what happens here. It gives me a common denominator of 8 because I multiply both numbers by each denominator, the other denominator. Now, again, what you do on the bottom, you do on the top. So if I multiply my bottom fraction by 2, my denominator, I'm also going to do with my numerator. This will give me 6. If I multiply my top fraction and the denominator by 4, I'm going to multiply the numerator by 4. So we keep the same value. Now, what we're going to do now, in this case, our operation is to add. Let's add. The denominator stays the same, which is just 8, and all you do is add the numerators. So 4 plus 6, in our case, is 10. Now, in this case, you don't want to keep it that way. You always want to reduce your numbers. You can see quickly that 10 and 8, there's a number that goes both in 10 and 8, which is 2. If I divide both top and bottom, again, what you do on the top, you do on the bottom, or what you do on the bottom, you do on the top. 2 goes in the, so 10 divided by 2 is 5, and 8 divided by 2, in this case, is 4. And so we have this improper fraction, but looking earlier, we had the same answer before, and you can convert that improper fraction to a mixed number. In our case, it'd be 1 1/4. Now, in this example, again, we want to find the lowest common denominator. So there's 2 things I want you to do. And if you want to pause, you can, is find the lowest common denominator of adding, in this case, 4 fractions. And then let's add and see what we get as an answer. So if you want to pause and take your time and say, I may find the lowest common denominator, you can do that. If not, you may have to multiply numbers to get very close to a common denominator, and then you want to add, again, just the numerator. So let's look at our whiteboard and let's see what we can do to get a common denominator. And maybe the least common denominator would be the best way for us to do this. I'm going to do it in this case. I'm going to add horizontally. So I want to figure out what's the common denominator. Now we got 6 and 3, 10 and 15. Now I want to start with the 10. The 10 is very unique because any numbers that we're going to have multiples of 10, they're going to end with a 0. So we have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And I just thought of something as I said that. So looking at that 10, I know 20, 6 and 3 doesn't divide in 20 evenly. Let's use another number, 30. So in this case, 6, yes, so we're good with 30 as a denominator. 3, yes. 10, yes. And 15, yes. So let's look at this. A common denominator in this case would be 30. Sometimes you want to look at certain numbers to eliminate so you don't try to do too many numbers in your head. So I'm going to write down 30 for each of them and say, how do we get 30? So that's what I'm going to show you up on the numerator. So for the numerator, it was 5 times what that gave us 30? It'll be 5 times 5, because 6 times 5 is 30. For 3 to change to 30, the next one, we had to multiply 3 times 10. So this would be 1 times 10. Again, what we do on the bottom, we do on the top. For the 10 to become 30, for the third fraction, we're just looking at the denominator, we had to multiply 10 by 3. So we're going to multiply 7 by 3. You see the pattern we're doing here? And so for the last one, the fourth fraction, for that 15 to become 30, we had to multiply it by 2. So we're going to multiply the numerator 4 by 2 and times 2. And so what I'm going to do here, guys, I'm going to rewrite the numerator. Make sure I do this correctly. And so this will be 25. This would be 10. This would be 21. And this would be 8. And then now Mrs. C is going to add just the numerator. That's all we do. Let's see what we get here. 819. Look like we get 64. You can double check me to make sure that's correct. Just let me know. Raise your hand or whatever you want to do. And in this case, we have an improper fraction. Now, I'm going to do is convert this as a proper or a mixed number, because since improper fractions, we can convert that as a mixed number. And so one way, I'm going to write it in green. I'm going to put up on the top over here. So how many times does 30? Goes into 64. So we know 1 times 30 is 30. 2 times 30 is 60. So we'll use 2, because I think 3 would be 90, it'd be too big. So this would be 60. Subtract 4. 30 can't go into 4, so that's my remainder. So how do I write this answer? We learned from our previous lesson. I'm going to do it in blue. It's going to be 2 coming from up here, and 4 over, in our case, 30. Now I like this because don't circle that. Look at that fraction piece. Can we reduce it? Can it be simplified? Can we get it in the lowest terms? And we can get it to lowest terms by dividing top and bottom. Whatever you do on the top, you do on the bottom by 2. And so my final answer will be 2 over 15. And so that's what I get as a answer. And so in this case, I will circle this for my answer. One of the last things we're going to do as far as adding fractions, let's look at adding mixed numbers as fractions. How do we add mixed numbers? What you do, you add the whole part and you add the fraction part. So that's one way to do it. I'm going to show you 2 ways to do it, and you can take which way you like to do it. So if we just do adding straight across or straight down, as I wrote up here, 2 plus 3 is 5. I'm working ahead. That's the whole number. And the fraction part, now notice we can't just add the fraction. We have to find a common denominator. So in this case, I'm going to put it on the side here. Our common, I'll say our least common denominator will be 6. That's what I noticed real quick. Now, the first fraction doesn't change. It'll just be 2 over 6. But the second fraction will change because we changed that 2 to a 6. That means we multiply Trying to get this multiplication symbol, guys, by 3. And we do the same thing in the numerator. So this is a 3. Now we just add. So then this will be 6. And in our blue, we have 5. So that'll be our answer if we want to add in that particular way, far as mixed numbers. Now, I normally sometimes teach students that there's another way you want to use, and students like this way, and you also could use this for subtraction. So what we're going to do is, we know the answer, but let's use the same problem. I'm show you another way how you look at doing this. You may want to write this down. When you add mixed numbers or subtract mixed numbers, we're talking about these mixed fractions, these fractions that has a whole number and a fraction part, convert it to an improper fraction. And sometimes it's a lot easier to do it that way, and then add or subtract. So number one, convert it as an improper fraction and then do the operation. So let's do that very quickly with this problem. So we already understand that how to convert this to an improper fraction is multiplying 2 times 2 for the top, which is 4, plus 1 is 5. So that'll be that as a improper fraction. And the bottom, 6 times 3 is 18, plus 2 is 20, so it'll be 20 over 6. Now, once they're improper fraction, you do the same thing before, get a common denominator. The only way you can add and subtract fractions, you must have a common denominator. We did before, we have 6 and 6. Now this doesn't change because that's 20 over 6. But for this one, we multiply by 3 to get that as a denominator. Do the same thing for the numerator, it'd be 15. And then let's add. So 6 is a denominator, and we end up with 35 if I did my math correct. Now, you can have that as an answer if that's reduced, or a lot of times instructors like to have it converted as a mixed number. So now let's convert this back as a mixed number since our original problem was a mixed number. So basically, we're just going to divide 6 into 35. So we have 5 goes into that, 30, subtract, remainder of 5. That's my remainder. So how would I write this as an answer? Let's put this in blue. Maybe, excuse me, there we go, blue. Use this, this would be 5 with our remainder. This is our remainder, 5 over 6, 5 and 5, 6. And that's our answer. And that's how you add for mixed numbers with fractions. Okay, guys, let's look at now subtracting fractions. Now, we're going to use this on the whiteboard, and this should be a subtraction sign here in between the 13/5 and the 9/20. And same thing, find a common denominator. Let's go to our whiteboard. And as we go to our whiteboard, if you want to find that common denominator or that least common denominator, we can do subtraction of fractions that way too. So on our whiteboard, we have our subtraction problem of fractions, and I'm going to do it vertically. And again, we want to find that common denominator. So let's think about it. What can we get as a common denominator? We're looking at 15 and 20. So let's start with 20. Since it ends with a 0, we know we end with 20, and then we have 40, we have 80, and we move forward. And so we know we ended with zeros there. So let's think, what can we have as a common denominator? 20, let's see, 40, I'm looking at the 15, 3, 60. I think we could use 60 if you agree with me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the denominator to 60. And I'm going to figure out how did I make that 20 a 60. So I'll multiply this by 3, and I'll multiply this by 3. So you go ahead and do that. And then to do the numerator or the denominator for the first one, I multiply that by 2. Nope, not 2, excuse me, guys. For this one, I multiply by 4. I saw that, 4. And we'll do the same thing up here by 4. So let's figure out what we have here. So let's start with the top fraction. So that would change our value in this case to 52. And if I'm not mistaken, this one would be 27. Now all you do is subtract the numerators, leave the denominator alone, so it'd be 60. And in our case, when we subtract those two values that we have here, I believe we have 25 over 60. Now notice I'm not going to circle that because I noticed that 25 and 60 is not reduced. So what two numbers we can divide into it? So let's just start with 5 and 5. 5 goes in there 5 times. And how about for 60 is 12. Okay, how about 5 and 12? Can we reduce that? I think that is reduced. So then we just circle that. And that's how you subtract fractions. Same way as adding fractions. Let's do another one. So I'm going to go to another page and let's look at mixed numbers. Again, same thing as addition. If you know how to add, you should know how to subtract because it's the same concept. So let's write down a number that we have here. We have 5. And let's say 4 over 6, okay? And then we'll subtract that from 1 and 1/3, okay? Now in this case, I am not going to do the whole number and then I'm going to subtract the fraction piece. I can do that, but what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make them improper fractions. A lot of times students like to do the improper fraction method because it eliminates some carrying and borrowing over that we have here. So watch this. So let's convert each of these to improper fractions and then find the common denominator. So let's start, so for some reason I'm starting on the bottom number, okay? So I'm gonna start on the top. So 6 times 5 is 30, and then this would be 34 if I'm not mistaken. And then the same thing, 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. So this is 4 over 3. So now what we're gonna do is get a common denominator for 6 and 3. And a common denominator, in this case, I'm gonna use 6. Now this remained the same because it's 34 over 6, but the bottom one, how do I get that? Just multiply by 2. And so this would be 8. Now remember, our operation is subtracting. So we want to subtract 34 from 8 from 34. In this case, the denominator is still 6. And we end up with what, 26 here. And so in this case, we have 26 over 6. Now, again, we don't want to keep it that way. We want to continue to divide because we want to make sure this is reduced. Divide by 2, divide by 2. And I'm going to write in blue over here. So write my answer. And so 2 goes in 26 divided by 2. In our case, I believe it's 13. And 6 divided by 2, in this case, is 3. And so you can write this as 13 over 3, or you can write that as a mixed number. 3 goes into 13 or without going over. Again, writing this as a mixed number. So you can write this as a improper fraction or as a mixed number, 4 1/3. So usually give us one answer and circle only one answer, but I'm just showing you different ways you can get the answer or write it in this particular case. So basically what we went over is adding and subtracting fractions. That is the basic thing for adding and subtracting fractions. Find the common denominator and then do the operation. If you have a mixed number, a lot of times you want to convert that mixed number to an improper fraction and still find the common denominator. I hope this helped. If you have any questions or you still want to get some clarification, look over the video again and also look at some of the materials that we have, supportive materials that's on our website for the MathLink Academy. Hope this has helped. Talk to you soon.